Students, we are working on lesson 3.1, and our essential question at the top of the page is, how can you describe the relationship between two decimal place value positions? So boys and girls, we're going to do our investigate. We need color pencils and we need a straight edge. So a straight edge is just a ruler or anything like that will help you make straight lines. So we're going to start down here, boys and girls, where it says thousands are smaller parts than 100. And in class, we talked about hundreds being like a penny. So if 100 is divided into 10 equal parts, you have 1,000th. Now, boys and girls, keep in mind, 1,000th is so small that it doesn't even get a coin. So what we're going to do, boys and girls, is we are going to start over here, and we're going to use the model at the right to show tenths, hundredths, and thousands. So we're going to start here with A. It says divide the large square into 10 equal columns or rectangles. Then shade one rectangle. What part of the whole is shaded rectangle? Write that part as a decimal or a fraction. So boys and girls, we drew 10 columns. Now it's asking us to shade 1/10. So what we're going to do is we're going to color one of these rectangles a different color. So we're going to use green for this particular example. Now, boys and girls, if we see that there is one rectangle out of 10 whole rectangles that are shaded. So if we were to write that as a decimal, we would say 1/10. Or if we were to write it as a fraction, we would say 1/10, because there is one shaded out of 10 rectangles. We're going to go on to B now. B says divide each rectangle into 10 equal squares. Use a second color to shade one of the squares. What part of the whole is shaded square? Write that part as a decimal and as a fraction. So now, boys and girls, we are going to create our squares. So now, boys and girls, Miss G wasn't able to use a straight edge, but if you're using a straight edge, your line should look much better than mine. So right now, I'm going to color in one square, because that was what it asked us to do here. It said color one square. If we have one square colored, boys and girls, that is one square out of how many total squares? 100 squares. So if we were to write that as a decimal, we would say that is 100th, or 1 out of 100. Notice, boys and girls, 1/10 is very similar to a dime, and 100th is very similar to a penny. But we know that we'd rather have a tenth, because one dime is bigger than one penny, which was 100th. So now, boys and girls, we're going to go on to step C. Now, boys and girls, we are on step C. It says divide the enlarged hundredth square. So if we know this down here, this is representative of 100th, which is just like saying one penny. And because this is enlarged, we know that it's still just one square. But it says to divide it into 10 equal columns. It says if each hundredth square is divided into 10 equal columns, how many parts will it have? Well, let's draw our rectangles. So boys and girls, although it looks a little sloppy, I've drawn down here 10 rectangles. I'm going to color one of those rectangles yellow. So if we notice, boys and girls, this question up here, it says how many parts will the model have? We would say that in this bottom part here, it would have 1,000 parts. So we're going to write that down. 1,000 parts. And now we're going to go on to our last part of our activity. It says use a third color to shade one rectangle. We shaded that one rectangle yellow. And it says what part of a whole does the shaded rectangle represent? Well, boys and girls, we know that one square is like a penny, or we call that a hundredth. So if we have less than 100th, remember we talked about that coin that's so small it doesn't even get anything. It doesn't even get a coin. That would be 1,000th as a decimal and as a fraction. So boys and girls, just to recap here, remember 1/10 was one whole column, 100th was one little square, and 1,000th was one little sliver out of the 10 that we cut the one little square into. So now we're going to make connection, boys and girls. We are going to talk about the relationship of a digit in a different place value with the same decimals at its whole number. You can use your understanding of place value patterns and a place value chart to write decimals that are 10 times as much or 1/10 of any given decimal. So boys and girls, if we start over here on the side, if we think of 400ths, it's like saying you have 4 pennies. Well, if you had 10 times 4 pennies, you would have 4 dimes, which is representative of 4/10. 4/10 is 10 times as big as 4 pennies, which is 400ths. Now, boys and girls, if we look at the other example that we have, boys and girls, it says blank is 1/10 of 400ths. Well, 400ths is like saying 4 pennies. So if you're talking about a value that's less than 4 pennies, we know we're talking about hundredths. So sorry, I misspoke there, boys and girls. We're talking about 4,000th. So this number here would be 4,000ths. Now, boys and girls, if we use the steps below to complete the table, step 1, we write the given decimal in the place value chart. We did this work a little bit with this in class, but then we're going to work with placing it here. It says step 2, use the place value chart to write the decimal that is 10 times as much as the given decimal. So boys and girls, if we start here with 300ths, this is like saying 3 pennies. If you have 10 times as many 3 pennies, boys and girls, you would have 3/10 or 3 dimes. Next, boys and girls, if you go back to the original number, 300ths, if we're talking about a number that's less than 300ths, we know we're talking about thousands. So this would be 3,000ths. So we did step 2 and step 3 there. Now, boys and girls, we're going to go back to this decimal. We have 1/10. If I get 10 times as much as 1/10, boys and girls, my decimal moves 1 space to the right, and I get the number 1, because $1 is 10 times as big as 1 dime. Now, if I go back, boys and girls, to the original decimal, 1/10, if I'm talking about a number that is less than 1/10, 1/10 less of it, we would have the number 100th. And if you compare this, boys and girls, a penny is smaller than a dime, but a dime is smaller than a dollar. Now, boys and girls, we're on the last example here, which says 700ths, which is like 7 pennies. And if you want to get 7 times as big, boys and girls, you would have 7/10, which is like saying 7 dimes. Now, if we go back to the original one, boys and girls, 700ths, if we're going to get smaller than that, we know that the only thing smaller than a hundredth is a thousandth, so we would get 7,000ths. So I have one more thing that I want to just recap with you, boys and girls, and we talked about this a little bit in class. When you are counting up your values, remember, you count starting the largest unit first, which would be tenths, then you count the hundredths, and then you count the thousandths. So let's try to put some of that into action here, boys and girls. So let's count what we have here. 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10. So right now, boys and girls, we have 6/10, but we're not done yet. Now we're going to count our hundredths. Remember, our hundredths are the squares by themselves. 100th, 200th, 300th, 400th, 500ths, 600ths, 600ths. Now lastly, boys and girls, we're going to count our thousandths. So let's count our thousandths. 1,000th, 2,000th, 3,000th, 4,000ths, 5,000ths. 5,000ths. So the number we have here is 665 thousandths. Again, boys and girls, make sure that you always count out first your tenths. So we have here, boys and girls, 1/10, 2/10, 3/10. Now, boys and girls, this picture got cut off here, but there was actually a missing hundredth from that column. So this would be 100th, 200th, 300th, 400th, 500th, 600th, 700th, 800th, 900ths. And then lastly, we're going to count our thousandths. So we have 1,000th, 2,000th, 3,000th, 4,000th, 5,000th, 6,000th, 7,000th, 8,000ths. 8,000ths. This number, boys and girls, would be 398 thousandths. Now, boys and girls, when we analyze just this last little one here, we have to keep in mind, what is this statement saying? 6 tenths is 10 times as much as 6 hundredths, because 6 dimes is much bigger than 6 pennies. Now, lastly, boys and girls, we have our one last example here. It says 7 thousandths is 1/10 of what number? Well, if it's smaller than a number, we know that the number that is smaller 1/10 by would be 7 hundredths. So there's a lot in this lesson, but I think you're going to do a good job with it. You worked really hard today in class, so keep it up.